Okay folks, in this lesson we'll be taking a look at the Arnold IPR. The Arnold IPR window is designed to give real-time feedback of changes made in the scene, offering a significant workflow speedup. The IPR or interactive preview render window will automatically update the render every time it detects a change in the scene. So we're going to be working with this simple scene. And obviously, in order to actually access IPR, you can go to the plugin menu, C4D2A, and click the IPR window to open it up. But we have already docked it in our user interface right here. So I can press play actually to start the IPR. Now let's take a look at these buttons, at these menus, and some of the other options that we have in the IPR. First, you can use the play button here to start and stop the interactive renderer. Now we have the pause button, which stops updating the scene until it is released and collects all changes in the background, and it is useful to save time between multiple changes when the scene exports takes too long. So for example, I can open up this shader here and just for example change this color maybe to another color, and if I release the pause button, as you can see, we get our IPR back again. Just press Ctrl Z. Then we have scale, which defines the resolution of the interactive render by scaling the final render resolution. At the time being, if I go to my render setting, you can see our final resolution. Let me also make sure we are having Arnold, is 1280 by 720. If I set the scale to 100% here, we're gonna get the same exact resolution also in our IPR. If I use something like 50%, we are gonna be having 50% of our final resolution, which can be very, very useful. So let me set it to 55 here for now. Now, if you want to actually have a custom resolution instead of the scale, something independent from your final resolution, if you go to the view menu, you have this custom resolution option. And now you have this custom resolution, and this defines the resolution of the interactive render independently from the final render resolution. So you can, let's say, maybe 200. And if I just make sure lock ratio is disabled by 800, so you can have any weird resolution that you want. But in this case, let's use the scale button. I normally tend to use the scale instead of the resolution. We have this zoom value, which is the zoom level of the image area is being controlled here. So it's just like zooming in and zooming out, so nothing too specific. Then we have this channel button here, which changes between the R, G, B, and alpha channels. We have this debug shading button, and this enables or disables the debug shading mode, and the active debug shading mode can be defined in the render menu debug, and as you can see, you have all of these debugging mode that you can view it right in the IPR without having to set up any shader network or anything. Okay, let me disable this for now. We obviously have our render region, and you can use this render region tool to marquee select an area within the IPR window that you wish to render. So if I just clear the IPR for now, okay, and enable my render region tool, I can use this corners to actually define the region and run the IPR, and this region will be rendered. Or you can move this, or simply you can shift and drag and select a specific render region that you want. Let me just clear the IPR again. Now next we have this render selected object button, and you can use the render selected object tool to re-render only those areas of the image which contain the selected object. For example, if I select this sphere here and enable the render only the selected object and run the IPR, you can see only the buckets that actually contain this sphere will be rendered and not the rest. And if I change my selection to this object here, as you can see now, those will be rendered. Let me just disable this. Then you have this option that basically render to the viewport. So if I enable this, you can see now the IPR is in your viewport. That's something that you can do, but I tend to use the IPR obviously because it gives us more options. Next we have this display combo box here, which you can select an AOV to display in the IPR window, and AOVs listed here have to be defined by the render settings. Right now we only have beauty and alpha, and if you had any other AOVs like we had for example in our previous lesson, and we use this menu here to actually select different AOVs to be shown in the IPR window. Then we have this camera menu here, which you can select the render camera of the interactive preview. In the box lists all the camera objects of the scene along with two special items. We have this active camera, which always reflects the camera selected in the viewport. So whatever camera, if you have 10 cameras, and the one that is active will be used in the IPR if it's set to active camera. And we also have this default camera. So if I just get out of the camera, you can see we have this default perspective view from Cinema 4D. And if I run the IPR and change my camera to default camera, as you can see that view will be displayed even though we have an active camera in the scene. And I can select a specific camera that will always be rendered no matter what other cameras that you have selected, or if I just get out of my camera, you can see this active camera will be always rendered in the IPR. For now, let's set the camera to active camera. Next we have this snapshot button, which basically sends the current IPR image to the picture viewer, as you can see, along with other information, for example the render time, the sampling, and all of these other useful information are here. Now let's take a look at some of these options that we have in this menu. First one, under view, we have this show pixel information, and if enabled it displays the coordinate and color of the pixel under the mouse pointer in the status bar. Right now if I put my pointer on the pixel, you can see we don't get any information about that pixel, but if I enable this show pixel information, now as you can see we get the coordinate and the pixel values of the pixel that is under the pointer, right, which can be very, very useful. Now let me disable that. We have custom resolution that we discussed. We have this grayscale single channel, and if this option is enabled, it displays the selected channel R, G or B in grayscale. So if I go to R, G or B channel, you can see they are displayed in grayscale instead of the colored version. Then we have this custom color space, and when enabled, a color space combo box is visible in the toolbar listing the available color spaces based on the active color manager that will be discussed later on. Let's disable it for now. Then we have this fit to window, and it updates the zoom to fit the image to the IPR window, as you can see. And then we have this fit to render region, and it moves the render region to the center and updates the zoom to fit to the window. So if I have a render region like this one, for example, I can say fit to render region, and as you can see we only see this render region, and the zoom value has increased to reflect this change. So let me just get out of this by scrolling. Now under render we have a render with AOVs. And when enabled, all the AOVs are rendered at once, which means the IPR does not restart when you change the display AOV. And if disabled, when you have different AOVs and you select different AOVs in this list, the render will start from scratch to actually render that particular AOV. We have enable motion blur, and when enable, obviously motion blur is displayed in the IPR. So if you don't see any motion blur in the IPR, make sure this option is enabled. We have this copy region to render setting, and when you enable render region in the IPR, and so let's say for example this region, and click on copy region to render setting, then the region is set as the render region in the render setting window, and this enables you to transfer the same region render dimensions to the picture viewer window. So in the render setting, if I go to my render region and enable it, you can see this exact region has been copied to this section here, and if I render my picture viewer, you can see only this area will be rendered that is defined by the render region. There you go. Let me disable this. Next we have this render snapshot from region only, and this flag controls if a snapshot should only be taken of the region or the entire image, and this is only used when region render is enabled. So if I have this region, run my IPR, and if I have the snapshot from region only enabled and take a snapshot, as you can see, only this region will be sent to the picture viewer. Okay, we have clear bitmap, which obviously clears out the IPR. If I just stop that, that can be very useful. And finally, we have this debug shading, which overrides the shading in the scene by the selected utility shader mode for debugging purposes. So you can select any of these shading modes for debugging purposes here. So, okay. There are some other interesting things that you can do in the IPR. You can actually move around in the IPR like you do in the viewport. So if I hold on my Alt and my left mouse button, I can move around. With the Alt and middle mouse button, I can obviously pan. With the Alt and right click, I can zoom in and zoom out. Okay, let me just get back here. Now there are some very useful shortcuts. If you just press Alt W, which is the universal shortcut for Arnold, you can see we have some options for the IPR. For example, if I press R, the IPR will stop. If I press R again, the IPR will start. If I press P, it will pause the IPR. And as you can see, there are a bunch of other options that can be used. Also, if you right click in the IPR, you can see we have this very useful context menu. You can obviously use the select object to select any object that is under the mouse. For example, if I want to select this sphere right in the IPR, I can right click on it and say select object, and as you can see, the object is selected in the object manager. Now if I right click, we have this remove from selection, and if I right click on an object that is not selected, you can see it says append to the selection. So if I just click on this, you can see now both the sphere and the object are selected. Now let me just remove this, and we have this peak focus, which allows you to pick the focus distance right in the IPR. So let me just move the camera a bit, just so we have some depths, and add an Arnold parameters tag, enable depth of field. Let's go to something like 0.1. Now if I want to have my sphere as my focus distance, I can simply right click on it and say pick focus, and as you can see now this sphere is my focus, or on this clock here. Now another interesting thing here is the, let me just Control Shift Z a few times and get back to the original camera view, and also disable depth of field. Also, if you right click on an object, you have this create Arnold material. So if I right click, for example, on this abstract object and say create Arnold material, a new shader network will be created and assigned to the abstract object, and here I can do anything. For example, let's add a Lambert, maybe change the color, and press OK, and as you can see, immediately we have this material assigned and applied to our abstract object. So that's about the IPR window in Arnold for Cinema 4D. See you in the next lesson.